ICQ Podcast episode 398, Recruiting into Ham Radio. Hello and welcome fellow amateur radio enthusiasts to this our 398th episode of the ICQ Amateur Radio Podcast. Supported this episode by our inaugural member of the ICQ Podcast 400 Club, Winston Lawrence, Kilo Delta 2, Whiskey Lima Lima. Also by Dave LeBlanc, Kilo Foxtrot 7, Juliet Alpha Foxtrot, and of course our monthly and annual subscription donors. In this episode we join Martin M1MRB, Chris, Mike 0, Tango Charlie Hotel, Martin, Mike 0, Sierra Golf Lima, Frank, Kilo 4, Foxtrot Mike Hotel, Bill, Whiskey Charlie 3 Bravo, and of course Leslie, Golf 0 Charlie India Bravo, to discuss the latest amateur radio news. Myself, Colin M6BRY, rounds up the news in brief, and this episode's feature is Recruiting into Ham Radio. Well, we've created a new donation, especially to celebrate the fact we're about to approach our 400th episode. And the mailer only just went out, and Winston Lawrence is the first to sign up for one of our new special subscriptions to celebrate the ICQ 400th episode. And it's going to be called the ICQ Podcast 400 Club. So Winston, Kilo Delta 2, Whiskey Lima Lima is our first member of that club, and we really do appreciate your very kind support. Dave LeBlanc has also shown his value in the show, and he sends on a lovely message saying, "Hi guys and girls, just sent a few shillings your way. Thanks for all you do. I've enjoyed your podcast for a number of years now," and he thinks he's listened first time on episode 226 and look forward to it every fortnight. Keep up the great work. That's Dave, Kilo Foxtrot 7, Juliet Alpha Foxtrot. Now, Winston and Dave's donations, along with the monthly subscription donors, keeps your show advert-free, and they're a very valuable part of our system here, where rather than taking the advertising dime, we ask you to send back the value you find in the show, and as I say, think of us when you're listening to the show. If you want to get involved in doing that, or more importantly, join the ICQ Podcast 400 Club, it's a very simple thing to do. Go to icqpodcast.com/donate. Click on one of the links there, and you can either set up a subscription using PayPal or using your credit card, and say that gets sent to us, and we can continue to do the show for you every fortnight, like we've been doing for now for nearly 15 years and nearly 400 episodes. Right, well now we're going to create that value and that enjoyment for you by joining Martin, Chris, Martin, Frank, Bill and Leslie to discuss and generate thoughts about the latest amateur radio news, including CB versus ham radio on 10 metres, and hackers disrupt Russian radio. As always, we hope you enjoy.
Right, hi guys, and welcome to episode 398 of the ICQ podcast, and tonight's news roundtable for that episode. Going down the list in the order I usually have it in, Mr. Chris Howard, M0TCH, is joining me.
Very good evening, guys, and I can hear some chuckling in the background. I can guess who it is. It's the usual naughty boy, but we'll wait for his turn before we can tell him off.
Well, we never tell him off, you know that. We also got Mr. Martin Rothwell, M0SGL. Hi, Martin.
He tells himself off. That's the difference. But yes, good evening. Can I just clarify? Did you just say at the start of this 398?
398, yes.
The next time that we're all on this call together is going to be episode 400.
The chosen team.
Well,
the reason is the reason we're going to be on number 400. No offense to the rest of the presenters, but there's a reason.
Well, don't get too excited, boys, because
are we getting our P45s?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. No. I have a meeting with Colin. I have a meeting with Colin on the day before this goes out to try and think about what we're going to do for episode 400. And I know the guys in the other team want to be involved, so we might do something completely different and get you all together.
Completely. It's going to be about PMR 446 and CB radio from now on, isn't it?
If you like. And national societies. How about that?
Don't even get me started on national societies.
Okay. Right, well, let's move on before we get into real trouble. Moving to the other side of the pond, we have Mr. Frank Howell, K4FMH. Hi, Frank.
Hey, Martin, and you don't have to be a statistician to know we're 2 away from a neat milestone for us. And great to be here, folks.
Good to have you, Frank. Yeah, 400 coming very soon. Also, we have Mr. Bill Barnes, WC3B. Hi, Bill.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. Thank you for the invite.
Yeah, no problems, Bill. And naughty boy, who's probably dunking biscuits at the moment, Mr. Leslie Butterfield, G0CIB.
Martin, mate, I'm innocent. I've done nothing. I mean,
He's a serial dunker. Don't believe it.
I'm going to sort of plead the fifth. You know, I mean, I know we don't have it in this country, but I could plead it. So,
You know that the cream eggs are now available, being that Easter is around the corner. You can see if they float in your tea.
No, don't encourage him.
anyway,
It's in his beer, isn't it, already? It's already at the bottom of the glass.
I know. Thanks for inviting me in, Martin. It's going to be good fun, as always.
Yeah, no problems, Leslie, no problems. They always give me grief, but it's all done in fun and there's no maliciousness about it at all.
Yes, there is.
Is there? I told you not to tell him. Right, let's get started. Right, this is a strange one for amateur radio because I picked this one up on the internet in one of the posts, and it said CB radio versus 10-meter radio, which is better? Well, I could duck for cover and go down the bunker and put my tin hat on if I want, but we have had few discussions about other forms of radio, and I know CB listeners listen to us, so I'm going to ask Frank to go first on this one. What do you think, Frank?
Well, I think this is an interesting story, and the last episode we covered GMRS, and which is a cousin, if you will, to CB radio. And so it's an article about CB radio versus 10-meter radio, which is better. Anytime you use superlatives like better, it's always a predicate to draw out the responder's values and how they value one thing over another. If anything, ham radio is tradition laden. I've said that in some other arenas several times. And if you're a ham radio operator, you think, oh, well, obviously 10 meters is better because why? It's amateur radio and you're licensed and you have to know more and et cetera, et cetera. And CB radio, at least now, it used to be, there's somebody that used to be KCP 4727, but I won't name that person. And today it's unlicensed and they don't know what they're doing. And gosh, that's just not very good. Now that comes from a value position, the value position of the culture of amateur radio. And in many ways, it's just wrong. If you want to ask the question of which is better, better for what? If you look at the history of sunspot cycles, I will go out on a little bit of a limb here. And if you look at the history of sunspot cycles and see when we had the highest sunspot number in recent generations, and it was sunspot cycle 19 during the 1960s. I dare say, whether they admit it or not, that tremendous sunspot cycle got many people into amateur radio after dabbling in CB radio. I confess I was one of them. I used to talk to Medellin, Colombia most every day at noon on a CB radio, and it might have had a 500-watt amplifier manufactured by Palomar Engineering. That may be why I'm one of their customers today. So I'll end it with that, is that CB radio as a way of wireless communication is fun. It's the same fun we have in 10-meter radio in the amateur world. And we're entering once again a sunspot cycle that, if our friend Dr. Scott McIntosh's team's predictions are correct, it's going to be the good old days of sunspot cycle 19 or close enough. So I'll end with that. Which one's better? For what purpose?
Yeah, you're right. For what purpose? If you just want car-to-car communications between two or three of you, CB radios are a lot cheaper to purchase than some of the other radios. But if it's short range and say being down on HF, propagation could be up. And I've heard people talking about CB is talking about having propagation all around the world. Martin, we call you the good budgie for a very good reason.
because I use CB lingo on repeaters, and it then I'll get some interesting people coming up to say, I haven't heard that in a long time. It's all good. So, CB radio versus 10-meter amateur radio, which is better? Well, again, like Frank said, it depends what you want to do to it. Now, it's fair to say that CB, or argument's sake here, we're going to say 27 megahertz, is not as good as 2 meters for local contacts. But when you take it down to 10 meters, what's the difference? They're pretty much next to each other. What's the difference between 10 meters and 11 meters? A meter. Now, personally, first thing I want to say is, how big is our email server, by the way? Do we have enough capacity? I can hear the emails flying in already. Either way, the difference between the two bands is licensing, power, antenna guidelines. And due to the fact that in order to get onto 10 meters, you have to do like exams and you have to do the course, the people using it and what they're using it for. There is absolutely nothing wrong with CB or 27 megahertz as a band. Yes, there are idiots on it, but before anyone comes in, there are also idiots in amateur radio. Look at some of the Facebook groups of amateur radio. There are plenty of people out there embarrassing themselves publicly. Tune around the bands, you will find idiots on both modes. Believe you me. You will find amateurs talking down to CBers who just genuinely want to learn, and there will be CBers that are put off by those very few smart aleck amateurs that really shouldn't be in amateur radio, that just like to talk down because you've only got a CB. But either way, you can tune around both bands, and admittedly, probably CB is dying out a little bit. I'm not saying it's dead, but it's probably dying out a little bit because of the advent of mobile phones and things like that. You will find decent conversations happening on both bands. You just need to have a listen at the right times. Like Frank, I came into amateur radio via CB. I got a CB when I was 13, a year younger than I should have been. But I came in via CB. I learned about propagation. I learned the very basics of RF theory, things like SWR and why your antenna has to be a certain length, and why the rules at what was the Radio Communication Agency at the time clearly hadn't been investigated, because an antenna that was 6 foot didn't really get out very well on CBs, when like the 21-foot one worked a lot better. But nothing wrong with CB. Please, I just wish, stop dissing it. Just let people, if people have questions, answer it and try and help. And if you are a CB that's trying to learn, just bear in mind that, if you get a stupid answer come back, ignore that person, go on and ask somebody else. There's no such thing as a stupid question. The stupid question is the one that isn't asked.
Yeah, I agree with you. There's no such thing as a stupid question, only a stupid answer. So there you go. Leslie, what's your thoughts on this?
Well, apart from seeing a great interest in our emails coming flying towards us, and I can see that happening, I agree with some of the sentiments. And to be honest, I don't care really where people are on the radio. If they want to play with CB, great. That's good. Why not? If they want to come into amateur radio, please help them out. I do not care where people are from. If they want to get involved in this great hobby of ours, they're welcome. And I can't emphasize that enough. This is what it's all about. I know. I remember in the 80s when, we were messing about with CB, and I blew some equipment up, and remember replacing the RF stages, the final RF stages on many occasions, blowing up these 3 amp hour supplies. But I wasn't too worried. It was just one of those things that happened, and I learned it by breaking some equipment. But there we go. That was a long time ago. And if anybody wants to come into the hobby from wherever they are, they're more than welcome.
Yeah, I agree with you. Everybody should be welcome into the hobby. And let's face it, we're all interested in radio. Chris, what's your thoughts on this one?
Not a lot left to say. I think that's been said by most of the guys. What's the difference? Well, which is better is a good question. Again, it depends on, as Frank was saying at the start there, what's the question? What you want to do with it? As you were saying, Martin, 10 meters or 28 megs, 10 meters, or 27 megs, 11 meters is in the HF part of the spectrum, and therefore, does some funny things up in the ionosphere and can propagate around. And as we know, the sunspot cycle is looking pretty promising now. So, without a license, you might be able to get a lot further than you might expect on CB. So, I think we're all saying that nothing wrong with CB at all. And I imagine it behaves. I mean, I've never, to be honest with you, I don't think I've ever actually used 10 meters. So it's like been licensed for sort of 13 years. Although I'm hearing that 10 meters currently is actually looking quite interesting. So that might be something I need to perhaps put up an aerial for. But I mean, yeah, what's the difference, or which is better? It depends what you want to do, isn't it? Really, I suppose. If you're happy to have a limited amount of power, but don't want the effort of taking an exam to get your amateur radio license, and actually you want to use some fairly cheap equipment, then I'd say CB is probably the right thing for you. If, however, you want to be able to run more power and have the ability to use perhaps other bands, then perhaps amateur radios for you. So there's no correct answer here, is there? Let's be honest.
No. And before I pass it to Bill, in the UK, we're issued our license for self-training in radio. If we just want to operate, not learn anything, then why are we in amateur radio? I'm not saying that CBs don't want to learn anything and bits and pieces, but predominantly amateur radio to get your license in the UK. It says it's for education and self-learning of radio. So, there you go. That's a very good reason why you go amateur if you want to do some study work. If you just like operating, then I can understand why people may want to go CB. Bill, final words on this one?
Not very much to add other than the article talks about, when the bands are open, 10 meters can, go worldwide. And that's absolutely 100% true. When we do our updates of what we've been up to in the last couple of weeks, I've been hammering 10 meters and 12 meters pretty hard and added some new countries to the DXCC list here, including one, China, People's Republic of China, which is from my locations over the pole. So that's always a challenging path. So got there on 12. CB bands in between the two of them. I also got where was here on 10. I got Galapagos Islands, Wallis and Fortuna Islands. That's down near Australia almost. Yeah, bunch of stuff here. Bunch of stations worked in the last couple of weeks on 10 and 12. So it does get, when it's open, it's open.
Yeah, certainly sounds it, Bill. Certainly sounds it. And, in fairness, I know this article is more about 27 megs and FM, but in the UK, you can do 27 megs SSB, CB SSB at 10 watts. So, it's fairly close to a foundation license. It's in power regulation, although you only have one band. But hey, as long as everybody enjoys themselves on the radio and they don't cause interference to each other.
Forgotten about that they legalised SSB in the UK. I think AM might even be legal as well. But
I'm not sure about AM, but SSB certainly
SSB is definitely legal on the EU bands. Yeah, I'd completely forgotten about that.
Yeah.
Sitting there on FM quite happily.
I think they called it angle modulation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Auntie Mary, wasn't it?
Yeah, I remember that.
Anyway, let's move on to our next news story. And our next news story is a reminder, really, because it's something that came up in some feed I was looking at. And I thought, hang on, either we knew about it and we forgot about it, or some really good information here. I'm going to ask Bill to go first in a minute, but Digital Library for Amateur Radio and Communications is a treasure trove. Now, on our website is really worth having a look at. And in fairness, I was looking at this for ages. Bill, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, the Internet Archive has a whole huge now archive of old ham radio books, thanks to the DLARC. Digital Library of Amateur Radio Communications. And it's old call books. It's, newsletters from various organizations. Looks like the entire run of 73 magazine, which, for those of us that have been around a while, Wayne Green used to run a interesting magazine called 73 Magazine. There's just so much stuff in here. I just could not believe how much material was out there, but it gets even better. I pulled up the 1992 call book because I'm like, hey, I'm pretty sure I was in the 92 call book. Yep, page 270. There I am with my mom and dad's address. So, I mean, and the scan's readable, because sometimes they scan stuff in and it's difficult to read. And the call book was written where you needed a magnifying glass anyway to use it back in the day. But I was just pleasantly surprised about the materials that were out here when you sent this out the other day. I spent quite a bit of time just looking through the various things, including some 73 magazines. So yeah, it's quite an archives and quite a resource that's available.
Yeah, then they also there's podcasts there as well, because I found a few of our podcasts. I'm sure they're all there, but I found a few of ours scattered within amongst the treasures. So I was quite chuffed at that. Martin, what's your thoughts on this one?
Do you know what? I've sort of known of archive.org and I've used the Wayback Machine quite a lot, but I've never really played with it in great detail. I've looked for sort of old Amiga magazines and things like that, because those that don't know, I really love like the Amiga computer. But and there's a lot of the old magazines like that on there, but I'd never really thought about looking at it for old amateur radio related stuff. I look at the more modern stuff, but I need to go back and have a look more through this. I've clicked on the link and I've got the link up on my page at the moment. And there's things like podcasts showing up and Baofeng Tech Library, but there's so much old historic stuff as well. It's incredible what's out there. So I know how I'm going to be wasting a lot of my time going through this. What have we got? 73 magazine from 1973. A call book from 1962. There's a lot of stuff out there.
Yeah, there certainly is, and I have spent quite a bit of time rummaging through this.
CB radio schematics and servicing. There we go. That'll take you back to our previous story as well. 1975, 70 to 75. That one.
There you go. Before it was legal in the UK. Hi.
Yeah. It'll all be AM stuff.
Yeah. Frank, what's your thoughts on this one?
Well, having been a professor and having served on the library committee, which I know Bill Barnes knows well, given his job currently in the library system, you sort of have an affinity for a collection of stuff, publications of one type or another. And of course, today, publications are not just those in print. This digital library of amateur radio and communications recently received some money from Dan Romanchik's company, and he works for Amateur Radio Digital Communications, ARDC. And that's given it a bit of a boost in terms of collecting this stuff. It's not simple, and it's not easy to create standards for scan material and things. Oh, yeah, you got a scanner, you can scan stuff. But how about scanning 1 million documents and tagging it and doing things with it so you can go back and retrieve it successfully long after the physical version is somewhere else, if not in a landfill. So that's one thing. I'm just amazed at their capability. But as Martin said, there's so much historical stuff here that gets my juices flowing. I just clicked for the earliest year in this archive, which is, believe it or not, 1854. They've got something published in 1854 that's relevant to this, on up through 1910. And there's about a dozen publications that are 1910 or earlier, including the International Code of Signals American Edition. 73s, anyone? We may go back and see what they had to say about that numerical code and what is a sign for. It includes the original wireless Blue Book, 1909, 1910. You heard our podcast feature on Hugo Gernsback. That was his publication, the first national listing of something called amateur radio operators before there was the FCC and before there were official call signs. I could go on like the others, but it is truly, if you love radio and amateur wireless communications, it is truly the thing you can cozy up with and find many things that you like, whether you're only a modernist and you care about contemporary things alone, or you're like me and you have a flair for history. It's just an incredible resource. Its cousin, a project called World Radio History, is more formal publications from around the world, and it is available and is also an incredible companion digital archive. So thanks for including this story, Martin. I think it should be known by every radio amateur.
Yeah. Well, I had great fun looking at it, and I thought, well, it's not new, but let's let people know that there are some things out there. So when you're tied up and can't operate, or for whatever reason, there's something else you can do. Chris, what's your thoughts on this one?
Well, I think this is great. I think it's a great reference. I think it's a great thing that we're not going to lose this material. I mean, I just like looking at the adverts. I like looking back at some of the magazines from the sort of 70s, 80s and looking at some of the things that we're now seeing at rallies for sale when they were new, what they cost and what they were, advertised as being the latest and greatest. And I find that fascinating, just looking at adverts, from the past and seeing that sort of thing. So no, I think this is a great thing. I think there's some great reference stuff in there that would be lost otherwise. So no, I think it's fantastic.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Some of those adverts were quite interesting. Leslie, what do you think?
Wow. What can I say? I've been looking at the site, and I'll just give you a taste about what they say their archive contains. And it's 735 billion web pages, 41 million books and text, 14 million audio recordings, 8.4 million videos, 4.4 million images, and 890,000 software programs. This is an absolute goldmine of information for the amateur radio that's doing their research. First time I've come across it, and I am gobsmacked.
Could you say those numbers don't necessarily, they're not that many billion articles on amateur radio? I think that's in total of the archive, isn't it?
What it says is, as our so do our commitment, today our archive contains.
Yeah, so that's probably
that's the list.
I think Archive's mission was to sort of effectively archive the entire internet.
Yeah, this is what they state. And looking through, I mean, I just typed some odd bits in, and it came up straight away, and I was stunned. This is going to be very, very, very useful indeed.
Well, obviously the presenters love this one, so I'm sure our listeners will. And very, very interesting site to have a look at. A word of warning, though, is you may find yourself sitting down at 9 a.m.
Your time will. I tell you what, you're going to be looking up some project, and before you know it, it's 3 o'clock in the morning, and it's like, how long did I spend on the PC last night?
Yeah. I reckon that's what's going to happen, Leslie. I really do. But it's a great resource.
Podcasts take no responsibility for how much time or anything you waste reading this, or from anything that might happen if you build something that didn't quite meet requirements back then. Safety or emissions or anything else. You do say at your own.
I know, the usual disclaimer.
I still want the link for the Amiga magazines.
It's Amiga format. Just search for that. I've downloaded a load of them. I'll have a chat with you off the air.
All right, thank you.
So let's move on to our next news story, and this isn't amateur radio again, but it is radio, and it does have some fairly wide-reaching implications if it happens. Now, I know this is a story in the States, but I'm going to give it to Martin first. And the auto industry is being non-committal to keeping AM in new cars. Now, I'm talking about medium wave because the States don't have long wave for broadcast, But AM on medium wave is, to me, very, very important for countries with massive land masses, isn't it, Martin?
Absolutely, and we've touched on things like shortwave broadcast in Australia before, but it doesn't surprise me that they don't want to be committal about it, because AM radio is being turned off. I'd always said that DAB should go a long time before AM does, but the people that are lobbying it clearly don't understand the technologies, but they are turning transmitters off. In the UK alone, one of our national networks have just turned off all of their AM transmitters. Literally, they just said, hey, we're turning them all off. And they did a little tribute to the frequency over the years, and they shut it down. And I think that they might be being investigated because they did it a bit before they should. A lot of the BBC, our publicly funded broadcaster, have been shutting all their local AM transmitters down. But there are some areas where AM is still very much used. In fact, some of the BBC transmitters had to be switched back on because people were, no, we still listen to it in this area. It's not available on FM or digital. This is the only way that we can get it. And I know, I think BBC Wales, they have a lot of FM frequencies, but they still have AM because there are places that FM and digital radio just don't cover, because it's, they're VHF. AM, the very way that AM works, gets into the hills where the other frequencies won't. Okay, yeah, I get why people want to get rid of AM. The broadcasters want to get rid of AM. You're obviously paying for the land that the tower sits on, or the rent, to Arqiva or whoever operates the transmitter, plus you're paying for the power and everything else that goes with it. And if you compare how many listeners are listening to AM versus FM or whatever, there's probably, you're not getting much return for your money. And so why would the car manufacturers commit to putting AM radios in the car? But for the sake of how much it costs to include the ability to receive AM in your car, how much is that adding to the cost of the car stereo? I don't know. I mean, there are still AM-only stations in the UK. There's quite a lot of them, including Radio Caroline, who's still broadcasting to this day. But there's a lot of them that still exist. I think it's just, why would you take that ability away? I understand them. We know they're not wanting to perhaps include long wave. Okay, they don't have long wave in America, but it seems an odd thing to want to get rid of, especially as AM is going to be around for a long time yet. I think there's still quite a lot of mileage on AM only stations, because the powers that be have not given sensible alternatives to AM, at least not that have the same level of coverage.
Yeah, I knew you'd have a good answer on that one. Having working in the broadcast industry, you know about that. Chris, what's your thoughts?
I believe for countries that have got, like America, for example, we have satellite radio. I think that's possibly the alternative for AM. But as technology goes, as Martin was saying, it's probably not going to take an awful lot of additional cost to include AM, in the car radio going forward. So not sure why they deliberately want to take it out. I guess you have to have an aerial for AM as well. But again, that's probably not a huge amount of additional cost. Saying that, I mean, my car hasn't only got a CD player or a tape player. It does Spotify, and it does that's built into the car, and it does obviously it's got radio, and it's got Spotify, and it's got Android Auto, but it hasn't got a CD player anymore. It hasn't got a cassette player anymore. So maybe it's just, people see that it's not perhaps relevant anymore. I mean, certainly AM radio, let's be honest, isn't as good a quality as FM radio. But as you're saying, for that sort of longer range, not having to put as many transmitter sites, etc., AM's still there, and like you were saying, there's still stations there that perhaps aren't there elsewhere. But I think there are, as we know, it seems that, and as we heard in a few episodes ago from the BBC Director General, he was suggesting that in, I think, was it 10 years' time, he suspects that there'll be no analogue radio at all. It'll all be IP-based, it'll all be internet-based, coming over some kind of 4G, 5G, 6G, whatever it is at the time, service. So I suppose it's the way things are going. It's a bit of a shame. And we'll have to see what goes. But I suppose if you think about radio and its big market, it's people driving. You can't watch TV in the car. I don't know how many folks listen to radio at home. Probably quite a few. Probably not as many as, the big market for radio is the sort of breakfast time, everyone driving to work and sat in the car and listening to the radio. And if they stop making calls with AM radios, that's going to severely limit the stations that run on AM. So I'm not sure what's driving it, if you know what I mean. I'm not sure what's causing this to happen, but I mean, it's probably quite political as well. This does talk about a senator in the States urging the manufacturers to maintain having AM radio in cars, but yeah, we'll have to see what happens. I suppose. I think the whole world is changing, isn't it? But, yeah.
You just hit it on the head, actually. There, you said people don't. Just as many people listen at home. People do listen at home, but it's, hey, smart speaker, play this station, because it's so much more convenient than going and finding your radio and turning it on, and you can listen to any station you want from anywhere in the world. And you're absolutely right; it will be IP delivery.
Yeah, I was going to say lots of things happening, but I still think it's important to have AM in the car. But that's just me. Leslie, what's your thoughts?
Well, I've been listening to with interest, and I think Martin has knocked the nail on the head with what he's saying with the difference between AM and FM and DAB. On the latter one, some of them don't work, DAB is good for local high density, and where you've got large areas, that's better covered by AM. So I think you're absolutely right there. And it also matters whether you're running the stations as a public service, which it should be, or as a profit-making company. And if you look at the latter, I think certainly they will go, unfortunately. I am a member of the AM Society, so I've paid my sub, so I've got some interest in this, but that's by the by. Yeah, what can we... I think things will change, and unfortunately, I don't think there's much we can do about it.
Well, we can keep lobbying.
Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah, and in fairness, this story came out of the US, and I've asked all the UK boys first. So, let's go over to Bill. Bill, what's your thoughts on this one?
I really don't have much to add, except I have a little concern about this because it's a U.S. senator asking U.S. automakers if they're going to keep AM radio receivers in the cars. Depending on where you're at in America, you might not have cell service, so you wouldn't get the normal emergency push to your cell phone. You wouldn't get some of the other internet-based mechanisms that they have. But at the same time, who really knows what the turn into AM radio station? And around here, it's 990 AM or something like that. I'm a little fuzzy on that. But, who would even remember those emergency broadcast station numbers around here anymore? So I'm not really sure. I could see both sides of this. I could see both sides, dropping it off. It's not a lot of electronics to have a reasonable AM radio receiver, but it's some. And, as they're manufacturing some of these cars, they are cutting every corner possible to save a couple cents here, a couple cents there, because they're getting so expensive to manufacture. They're afraid of people not buying them. So I'm not exactly sure where this is going to shake out, but it'll be an interesting story to follow as it hashes out here on this side of the pond for sure.
Yeah, I think it does need monitoring. Frank, last words on this one?
Yeah, I have a little different take, and part of it, before we started recording in our little rehearsal session, Martin and I talked a bit about this. There's a difference in the ecology, if you will, of, say, United Kingdom and the U.S. and other countries as well. If you were to take the Mississippi River and divide the U.S. into two sections, those in the west of Mississippi River, until you get to the West Coast. Now, the West Coast would be a distinct difference because of population centers. But until you get to those mountains from the Mississippi River, and you look at where internet's available and where it's not, IP delivery has a problem. I think there's another thing driving this, having talked to people who work in the electric vehicle industry. Note that the story is about electric vehicles, not gasoline-powered vehicles. I do not know the hybrid issue. I mean, to be honest with you, the hybrid cars in principle use the gasoline motor to generate electricity, which then feeds back into keeping the car running, so it reduces, it enhances your miles per gallon. Now, here's the fundamental problem that the electric vehicle makers have, and that's RFI. And I told Martin before we started, imagine a suburban neighborhood and everybody has an electric vehicle. And suddenly you have, and ham radio operators are not very important in this mix. I mean, let's just face it, politically, we're not that important. Car makers, those are major industrial group. But just imagine turning on a radio. What are you going to hear when you've got 50 electric vehicles coming in and out of your neighborhood? You're going to get RFI. Now, if we, and I mean in the collective sense we, and this is where Senator Ed Markey's letter was a point of concern, as some others have it. If we allow them to take the AM radio out of electric vehicles, they get a pass on reducing RFI. If they have to keep an AM radio in an electric vehicle, then they've got to make that vehicle quiet enough to hear AM radio. And people might say, who cares? Well, you may not care today, but you'll probably care tomorrow. Now, that's point number one. We've talked about futuring, and we said that's the way it's going. Well, we see that as the trend, but will it actually go there? We just bought a new 2023 Toyota Highlander, my wife's car, and it has a built-in cell system. Now, we use Apple iPhones, and it used Apple CarPlay, and it uses the Android version for that. But we got 3 months of a free cell service in it, and it ran out recently. But I can see a day where you can't have an electric vehicle without another cell bill because it won't work. You've even got Ford Motor Company here in the U.S. news cycle this time called on the carpet because they just patented a technology that could shut down your Ford motor vehicle if they don't get your payment on time. Now, you might say, well, them's are the terms of the sale. Okay, perhaps. My point is, it's not all sweetness and light to go toward IP delivery for everything. As Bill said, the emergency broadcast system, whether it's for tornadoes and things like that, you may be very likely in an area that does not have legitimate cell coverage. So, again, I think this warning is for electric vehicle manufacturers. And I think if they are allowed to remove or not include AM radio, that is a canard because what they really want to get by is reducing their RFI. Now, that's my take, whether it's right or wrong.
Frank?
Yes, sir.
Can I just say thank you for that? Because sometimes it's given me a different perspective on it. We learn things differently, and that's what you've done tonight, and it's just something I did not think of. Thank you very much for that.
Well, I learned it from someone who just went to work for Tesla. He's the son of an amateur radio operator who works for a 3-letter cell company in the U.S. And I learned from Jonah. He was a young man soldering in my little piece in Practical Wireless last year on a soldering platform. He was using that to solder wiring harnesses for an electric vehicle. And in talking with Jonah before we moved to Silicon Valley, he said, one of the problems we've got is we got RFI out the wazoo and we don't know what to do about it. So I began reading in some of the industry magazines, and down there in the little minor articles and such, you'll see things periodically about reducing RFI in electric vehicles. We'll see where it goes. I mean, there are other problems that have been solved. Maybe they can solve that problem, but who knows?
Here's a radical idea. How about you produce a product, be that an electric vehicle or anything, that doesn't produce RFI? Go and put some filtering in it. Go and find out what's creating that and stop transmitting where you're not licensed to transmit.
Martin, can I give you an answer to that?
You're going to laugh at me?
No, I'm not. I did some while back look at the legislation for this.
Yeah.
And it was piles and piles of legislation. And in the bottom, there was a paragraph that said, and I know people are going to go mad at this, but basically what it said was, you look at the social benefit against any interference issue, against the negatives. Basically, if you're going to make lots of money out of this, all the other rules above are thrown in the bin.
Exactly.
That's my reading of it.
Yeah.
But it was definitely there that you have to balance it against the social benefit, and so hence why that interference issue against a pile of cash is good, no contest.
Yeah, I mean, the trouble is the people that make the rules shouldn't be allowed to make those rules because they're going to come crying eventually, because at some point manufacturers and any manufacturer could produce a product that creates a lot of interference in one particular area of the band, and then at some point Ofcom or the FCC or whoever are going to go, hey, we've got this great area of spectrum that would be really good for this project that's coming up, and we can sell it for millions and millions, and oh dear, we've just allowed people to do this. It will bite them in the bum.
The golden rule is whoever has the gold makes the rules.
Yeah, and that's wrong. But
that's where we are.
Yeah, well, I think I better stop you at this point in time before we go. But an interesting story. Multiple looks at losing AM in cars and electric cars. There's a lot to discuss here, and I'm sure that we'll keep an eye on this one. Let's say not amateur radio per se, but we're having a good thing on this one. Now, I'm going to ask Bill to go first on this one again, just as a bit of fun. Hackers disrupted Russian radio, and they fired off air raid sirens and all sorts of things by hacking the Russian radio. What do you think, Bill?
Naughty, naughty, naughty. I'm willing to bet that they had the control system hooked to the internet.
More of that IP delivery, Bill.
Yep. Random, not related, but kind of related story. There is a part of the grid operator here that recently got questioned because they were plugging in control systems for the grid to the internet without putting it on a private network. But that's been resolved. We're good now. But that's my guess. I actually see this one come through the normal channels that I read, but I bet you the post-game show analysis on how they infiltrated their systems and played their little prank. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was stuff hooked to the internet that probably wasn't patched or probably wasn't watched appropriately.
But a bit naughty, but an interesting one that probably most people won't hear about. Frank, what's your thoughts?
Well, I had the typical giggle as I wonder if the Ukrainian soldier on Snake Island was invited to do a promo for this. He said something to the effect of "Go home," and I'll leave it to your remembrance of the news cycle for that. But it is, given the scenario, whether it was the remote link that was hacked and intercepted, or it was through the internet or some other network, that was hacked. Nothing is totally devoid of the ability to be hacked, as we all know. So interesting, and it's some hijinks done in the time of war, and certainly the Russians would have done it to the Ukrainians if they could have thought of it first.
Yeah, that's possibly the case, and things like this happen all the time. Leslie, what's your thoughts on this one?
Oh, God, it's already been said, Martin. People go to these things. They found a crack in the system, and hey ho, it happens.
Yeah, but it could have caused, although it was a bit of fun, it could have caused a major problem. I mean, setting air raid sirens off, how many people would have, panicked?
Yeah, that's they're in conflict. These things are going to happen.
Yeah, Chris, what's your thoughts?
Well, it's a bit of fun, but also, nowadays cyber warfare is the thing, isn't it? I mean, we're told there's lots of hacking going on all the time, and we've got people hacking into companies' computer systems and websites and causing all kinds of issues. And this is the military thing now. That there are armies that have divisions that employ hackers. It's not all about being on the battlefield with tanks and guns. Some of this is now behind the scenes and hacking into things and causing disruption that way. And this is possibly an example of that. We don't know. I don't suppose we know where these hackers were based. It just suggests they're based. Well, I don't suppose we know where the hackers were. It may have been Ukrainians, and it might have been an officially sanctioned Ukrainian thing to disrupt what's happening in Russia. So yeah, it's I think the way that wars are fought is changing, and this may be the sign of things that may happen in the future. Give it a more serious tone.
Yeah, I think you could be right. Martin, you have last words on this one?
Do you know what? It reminds me of a sort of a TV series that was on a year or so ago, and it was Russia versus the UK, and it was like, I want to say Simon Pegg was in it, and they basically hacked our internet, and there's a lot of similarities to that program. It scares me. I know people were interrupting the buzzer in the early days of the war with waterfall graphics of people being very not very supportive of the Russian government, shall we say. But all this does remind me of, and obviously everyone has pretty much said, yes, okay, it's funny, but at the same time, it could cause innocent people to panic. This reminds me of the Max Headroom incident on American TV. I want to say it was in LA. I forget where, but if you YouTube search it, basically it was in the 80s. Chicago was it? Someone managed to get a high power transmitter in between the studio transmitter link of a TV station, in fact, of two TV stations, and interrupt it with a guy wearing a rubber mask as Max Headroom and saying all sorts of things. And the whole thing is online. I don't think they ever found the guy that was responsible for it, but there's a part of me that says, you shouldn't do this, it's wrong. But there's also that part of me that says, you know what? That's pretty impressive.
Well, a bit naughty, as you say, impressive, and all the bits and pieces on this one. Okay, let's go to our last news story. NASA says they want help, and they're asking ham radio operators to apply to give them help. Now, Frank, you know a fair bit about this because you know the society they've asked. So I'm going to get you go first, Frank, on this one.
Yes. This is the Ham-Sci organization, which I'm a scientist there via Mississippi State University. And the Ham-Sci organization is led by Dr. Nathaniel Frissell, who's up in Bill Barnes' neck of the woods at the University of Scranton. And young Nathaniel has done just a tremendous job organizing a group of many, many amateur radio operator volunteers. And now they work a bit with NASA, communicate with NASA, and some of the members of the advisory board are at NASA-sponsored facilities. So part of the reason for being for Ham-Sci is to study propagation events and better understand how to communicate, how the ionosphere works, and how that influences propagation. Well, NASA has a tremendous interest, particularly with GPS satellites and other spacecraft, of how that works and how natural events tend to affect that. And one type of natural event is an eclipse. And in October of 2023 and April 2024, we will have two eclipses. And so there is an organization of hams. Now, think about this for our listeners. If you participate in contests, it's no accident that there's a bunch of hams on certain ham bands at certain days of the month, because we've said, hey, gather and operate and exchange credentials, and we'll total up the score and see who wins. And it's a contest. Well, what they've done is organized hams to operate on these two dates prior to the eclipse, during the eclipse, and just after the eclipse. And it's called a solar eclipse QSO party. And if you go to hamsci.org, you can see those rules for 2024. I'm not directly involved in organizing this, but I get all the email traffic, and there's been a lot of work that goes into this. And so why is Ham-Sci doing it, and why is NASA interested? Because it's like a traditional experimental design. You got the pre-test, we're operating, everything's going okay. Here's an eclipse. And then afterwards, we've got a post-test. So we've got all these communication data. and we can look at how the eclipse made an impact, and more importantly, what was the timing of the impact, and where on the Earth was there an impact made. So in a nutshell, that's really what NASA is very interested in, is the data set that will come out of this for these two eclipses. And there'll also be some measurements of how does it affect a very stable signal, such as that at WWV in the US, CHU in Canada, and some AM broadcast stations. So there'll be a package of data gathering things that'll be around these two events. So in a sense, that's really what it's about, Martin.
Yeah, sounds interesting, Frank. Sounds interesting. Bill, what's your thoughts on this one?
Pretty much the same as Frank's. The last one that they had, I participated with a whisper beacon, and I do plan on participating again. That one I was just doing transmit and letting the reverse beacon network pick it up for data. But an article Frank shared a while ago led to another link that led to a link where they actually went through and showed you how you could actually, listen for stations as well. I may actually do that as well, just to give them a few more data points. Because like I said, this was a very interesting one, and the articles that came out about the effects of a solar eclipse on HF, it was interesting. I mean, basically, when this is, I'm oversimplifying this, by the way, but in the band where the solar eclipse was going on, basically you end up having nighttime conditions, and the atmosphere, the ionosphere reflected HF signals appropriately. So you got some really interesting, unusual DX possibilities going on there. So I definitely want to participate again and get some more data points into their system for their analysis.
Yeah, well, that's to say, be interesting to see what comes out of this one. Chris, you got any thoughts on this one?
I have, and I do recall this coming up years ago on the podcast and having a similar conversation. But it sounds like there's an opportunity that needs to not be missed. These eclipses don't happen that often, so let's make as much benefit as we can, or get the most out of it on each of these occasions. And yeah, it's funny that Bill mentioned Whisper there. I'd imagine Whisper does provide an awful lot of data in these events, because that's a fairly consistent way of looking at what's going on. So that with Whisper, I imagine, is a very good way to understand what the impact is of a solar eclipse on the way that radio waves are propagated around the world. So yeah, it's interesting, and I think it sounds like they involving amateurs, which is great. So it's something for us to get involved with, and NASA will go away and do some of the hard work behind the scenes with the numbers that they end up with.
Oh yeah. Well, I'm sure Edmund may get involved with this, because I'm going to give him his Whisper Light transmitter back on the day this podcast releases. I had it fixed for him, or I part fixed it, and we did it at work, as I mentioned on the last podcast. Just not caught up with Edmund for a while. Martin, what's your thoughts on this one?
Well, just the initial thing I saw when NASA said they wanted help, I can't help but think that there was a bloke from Wigan with his dog that made a rocket and went to the moon back in the 80s. Cracking toast, Cromit. Anyway, that aside, it's just nice to see that large organisations like NASA are recognising the usefulness of amateur radio, and it's one of these things that is going to be exciting for people to take part in. I'd be excited to see what comes out of it, but other than that, I don't have much more to add on it.
Yeah, well, as I say, I think what NASA's a massive organisation, but what it doesn't have is the number of the people on the ground and the diversity and all over the world. So it's something that they can't do easily, but we can. So it's good we're working with them on that one. Leslie, last words on this one?
Well, I've been listening for interest, especially Frank, because I know this is his bread and butter. I'm not into contests myself, but I can see that when the data comes in, the numbers are crunched, and then just see what the numbers are telling us, and eventually that will all add up to the library of radio knowledge, so to speak. So I think it's a good thing. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one. So let's see what happens. Right, let's find out what the guys have been up to since the last time I had a chat with them. Bill, I know you're on a hard stop, so I'll let you go first and tell us what you've been up to.
Yes, I got I believe I mentioned last time that I got the corners rehung in the trees for the 80-meter super loop, and I had to drop it the other week after windstorm because I had a branch hanging on it. So I dropped the one corner and got the branch off, and then after I put it back in place, a couple days later, I was looking at the wind blowing, and I noticed where it was rubbing against some branches. So I relocated one of the corners. So instead of being to the left side of the tree, I took it to the right side of the tree. I ended up getting the slingshot shot of the year, and I put it right between a Y at the very top of the tree. So now it's 20 foot higher.
Wow.
So bumping that corner up 20 foot higher, we're in the 60 foot range now. So I've been having a lot of really good luck on the bands between SSB on 12 meters, which I have very few contacts on 12 meters, and it's been open, and a whole bunch of DXpeditions on FT8. I got St. Brandon Islands. I got Sri Lanka the one morning, which that's over the pole. Anyone that's worked DX and the HF bands know that over the pole you have to have the right conditions, because if you have a really good aurora borealis going on because of the magnetic fields, it's a tough radio path. I got T88 UW from Palu. I finally worked somebody from China, BA6KC on FT8. Probably that's one of the few modes they're allowed to use. I picked up Norfolk Island again. Picked up Wallace and Furtuna on 10 meters. Whole bunch of Japanese stations. Hawaii, St. Martin, which is nearby, and the Galapagos and Maui, Malawi, Maui. That's over in the Pacific as well. So the story being for the listeners is, I worked a whole bunch of DX in the last 3 weeks, and it basically boils down to get on the air. We've had some just amazing conditions. We had an anomaly the one day. I don't know if anybody noticed. We had a solar flux index over 300. And it lasted for a couple hours, almost the whole day before the geomagnetic field caught up and basically closed the bands down. But I was making 15-meter SSB QSOs on 5 watts with the KX3. Wow. Anytime you're over 150, I've generally been, it's what the conditions are possible for SSB QRP. But when it gets over 200, you're in real good shape. 250 is like the legendary times I talk about in the long past in previous solar cycles, where I'm running around with a whip and a 5-watt radio, or ready to turn down the 5 watts. But very exciting. Yes.
Bill, let me just interject this, because you're using a horizontal loop. The original modeling estimates, and I had sent you a copy of the Practical Wireless article, and it's sort of in there, but I'll repeat it for our listeners. The original modeling stuff that's repeated by the ARL handbook, and to some degree Rothwell's handbook as well, for the horizontal loop shows a shocking amount of gain on the higher harmonic, like 12 and 10 meters. So I'm not surprised for 2 reasons. One, you're just getting a surprising amount of gain up there. And number 2, from my little loop around the edge of my house, and then another one that's up about 50 feet at a colleague's new house, 12 meters has just been blowing a gasket. I mean, 12 meters has just been incredible. So I think what you're seeing is leveraging your antenna and raising it up a bit, along with just looking at what's open, and you just really doing good fishing, my friend.
Yeah, and that's just a tail on to that. I did like your article, and I encourage everybody to read it. In fact, the way that you have yours installed is a very novel way of having it installed just under the edge of the roof there. But two things I've noticed. Number one is the old adage of height matters.
Mm-hmm.
Once I got past 50 foot, so I had much better luck on 40 meters and 80 meters with the antenna. And when I run the modeling on this antenna, it has these huge, like spiky lobes on 10, 12, and 15 specifically. So it has gain and deep nulls. But when I adjust the model for the height plus the antenna size, I've noticed that those deep nulls aren't as deep as I thought they were.
Yeah.
So, like the way I have mine oriented in the sky right now, I have a pretty good shot into Western Europe. So I hear like French stations real well, Spanish, Portuguese. I know I'm getting a null or a lobe that way. But it's fascinating between looking at the model that you make on the computer and then actually using it on the air, and it's starting to match. It makes you feel real good about the model, by the way.
Yeah.
Because I've had models before. The example I always use is I had amazing success of my Wyndham 40-meter Wyndhams, off center fed dipoles, 40 meters, 32 feet high. I work stations that the computer model for that antenna said I shouldn't. I should have this huge deep null, shouldn't get anybody over there, and it works. This is the other way around. This is matching the model, and it's fascinating. It makes for a very interesting time when you get on HF. Now, one thing I did miss, and I do want to share with the listeners, I missed 2 openings so far on 6 meters already. I'm not used to 6 meters being open to the West Coast in North America in March. That's kind of like a June thing in my mind. But we've had moments of mild weather and moments of severe weather. But those mild weather days where it's mild here and it's mild on the West Coast, we had some openings on 6 that I missed. So if you like the 6 meters, which is the magic band, when it's mild, go look at the weather report, over on the West Coast. And if it's mild there too, you might want to give 6 meters a try as well. And that's all I have for this time around, Martin.
Well, sounds interesting to me, Bill, and it sounds like you've been having lots of fun. So carry on and enjoy the propagation. Frank, what have you been up to?
Well, I've been continuing to work with Radio Amateurs of Canada, and in this little bit, Canada has a little different problem than, say, the U.S. does for amateur radio licenses. In the U.S., we have a 10-year renewal cycle. They don't have any. So you get a ham license in Canada, it's a license for life. Well, okay, so what do you do about that to get an idea about hams? Well, what RAC has been doing is they have been maintaining this snowball effort to identify silent keys in their database by announcements through clubs and in newspapers and things like that. So they've got a snowball effort, as I might call it, to get a list of silent keys. So I've been taking those and I've matched them to their official database and to see, okay, it's a license for life, but these people are now silent keys. So let's pull those out. So I'm finishing up some of that work. I've already geocoded all of the licenses in their database, and I'll tag the silent keys in a map, and I'll do a little technical report for Radio Amateurs of Canada. And it'll help them get a better sense of their license database. I want to come back to the last episode of the podcast. Martin, you kindly covered my blog post regarding a potential market for GMRS licenses for amateur radio in the States. And I think a number of presenters were positive. I think Dan was just a bit skeptical of what we might call the conversion rate in marketing. You tell a group of people about something, what percent are you going to get by it? So the conversion rate is always something you look at, what you're going to get. Now, I respect Dan's hesitancy and his doubt on this. but because it is some speculation. But I may not have made it very clear in my blog post of what a market is. It's not a statement that everybody will adopt a product or service, far from it. But in business, one definition of a market for a product or service is a means by which you exchange goods and services, and it takes place as a result of buyers and sellers being in contact with one another, either directly or through mediating agents or institutions. Now, that's a textbook type of definition for a market. Now, my blog post simply pointed out that the ARL, the RSGB, and other societies already market amateur radio to collectivities of people who may have absolutely no prior relationship to wireless radio. In the U.S., the Teachers Institute that the ARL sponsors, for example, is a train-the-trainer attempt to create a market for ham radio in schools where students constitute that market. Well, GMRS licensees have already acted to utilize FCC-licensed wireless radio communications. So that's kind of a market that is, a little more likely to be converted, if you will, than cold calls, as we might put that in sales. So to underscore the market viability of GMRS licensees for amateur radio in the U.S., I want to show the power of this podcast. Earl, WA4KBT, emailed me while he was listening to the last episode after he heard this segment. Now, his club, the Chattanooga, Tennessee Amateur Radio Club, has been reaching out to the thousands of GMRS license holders in North Georgia. He included his cell phone number. When I called him, he was shocked because he said, I'm not through listening to the podcast and you've already called me. So I had a nice conversation with Earl, and I found out that they've held joint meetings at the Chattanooga Ham Fest with GMRS licensees. They've held a joint winter field day with GMRS licensees. And the GMRS people have been making presentations to hams about how they use GMRS in communicating. What I found that was a little surprising is about half of the North Georgia GMRS club already holds a ham radio license. One half of those GMRS folks have a ham license. And over half of the Chattanooga Amateur Radio Club members hold a GMRS license. So at least in this one case, there's a clear market for amateur radio among GMRS licenses and vice versa. I may invite Earl, WA4KBT, and a couple of his GMRS friends to sit for a feature interview in the near future because I want to learn more about how this very successful market penetration of ham radio into the GMRS world has worked, and it seems to be working very well there. Maybe something unique to Chattanooga and North Georgia area. It may be something that's actually going on elsewhere in the country, but we won't know till we find out. So, Martin, look for a feature that I may prepare here in the next month or so. There we go. I gave a talk on my transmit quality study on modern HF transceivers to the Norfolk Amateur Radio Club in England. What a great group of folks. And David and Tammy do a professional job with what is equivalent to a TV studio that they do for their Zoom talks. Now, the video of that's on YouTube, and you can find it on the landing page at foxmikehotel.com. And lastly, Martin, I'm getting my portable ops team ready for the April 1st and 2nd Mississippi QSO party. I hope listeners will take a look at working us on the HF bands. We'll be doing sideband, CW, and FTA. We can't self-spot in that contest, but there's a website called QSOPartyHub.com that you can check for, say, K4FMH and spot our team there. Martin, that's what I've been up to, and I hope it will produce a feature for the podcast here in the near future.
Yeah, no problems at all, Frank. And the GMRS boys, if they're enjoying radio, that's good news. And it's always interesting to hear how other people are getting on. I know at the moment I've been asked, how do you find new members for a club? I was asked this last week, so I've been thinking about that, and I have certain feelings on it, but the GMRS guys in the States seem to be a good opportunity, put it that way. Leslie, what have you been up to?
Oh, I've been listening with interest to whatever everyone else is saying. What's happening here is we've got a bit of a block on cleaning our radio club shack. It's sort of it's a bit like a TARDIS and Fifth Dimension. The amount of stuff in there, it's more than the volume, and it doesn't quite make sense. And I keep trying to clear it out, and it's still so we haven't got there yet on that. It's kind of a bit of a block. But I will get there, and it's an ongoing job. I do not know why the stuff is greater than the volume of the shack. I really can't figure that out at all. What else is there? Well, I've also been doing a little bit of training because somebody wanted to get through the license, so I said I'd help him out. So we're concentrating on the training, and hopefully, I'm sure that with a bit of perseverance, he will get through. Over to you.
Well, that's good news. The training's also always good news. So sounds like you're having fun anyway. Martin, what have you been up to since last time we spoke?
You know what? Not very much. I mean, it's like the you mentioned about how do you find new members for your club? Someone said to me genuinely, why aren't your friends into amateur radio? I'm like, they are, and so we're on this call together. But there we go. I've actually not done very much in amateur radio. I've been very, very, very busy with work. We've been doing a lot of filming that has taken up a lot of my time, both in filming and in editing stuff. So not had much of a chance to play with stuff because of the deadlines I've been working up against. I came up on the talk group the other day. In fact, I'm on the talk group most days. Even sitting here this evening, I've had the radio on. It's been turned down, but I can see when call signs and stuff come up. But typically on my way to and from work, or in a minute sitting in the home office, I'm lurking around the talk group if people call out, and if I can reply, I'm not in one of my many meetings that seems to be dragged into every day. I will. Other than that, the only other thing really that I've been playing with, I had a bit of a tune around the like the lower bands, the shortwave and the medium wave bands, just to see what's going on. As as we mentioned earlier, some of the AM transmitters have gone off. Just wondering what else you can hear on those frequencies that might be coming in from further away. That's always a bit of fun. And you've probably mentioned it already on the last podcast, but you and I had a 23 SEMS contact, which was quite fun on FM. I don't think I've ever had a 23 SEMS contact on FM. I've had lots on USB, but never on FM. But that was quite exciting. It was a whole new world. And you mentioned, I think we were talking on the calling channel, but no one told us to get lost. So it is quite a quiet band. But other than that, that is pretty much it from me. I haven't really done anything else radio-wise this month.
Yeah, well, the 23 SEMS contact was actually one of my bucket things I had to do on my bucket list. So that was good, and I'm looking forward to very many more 23 SEMS contacts, and as we go forward. So I'm looking forward to that, Martin. So it looks like you've been busy. Chris, I know I spoke to you a couple of weeks ago because I dragged you into the other team because I was short of bods, but what have you been up to?
Well, some club admin stuff. As we know, I'm a club secretary, so there's always things to do there, getting people to do talks and that sort of thing. And we've recently introduced a new online membership system, so people can now pay their membership fees by credit card, etc., which brings us right into the 21st century. Before, we were doing things on paper and paying by check and cash and postal order and who knows what. So this hopefully is going to make life a lot easier for us to manage the club, and also easier for members to actually join and to renew, that sort of thing. It streamlines the whole thing, really. So that's been a fair bit of work involved in that. That's finally gone live, and I know, Martin Rothwell, you were involved helping with that as well, so that was all good. Radio-wise, I have been on HF a little bit. It's quite funny. The other day I switched the radio on, heard somebody calling from Canada, calling CQ, went back to, I was running that 50 watts, and he came back to me for gave me a 5 and 9 report. And so I think it shows that the bands are looking in good shape. I think the predictions are certainly the Frank's predictions around how things are going to be much better than we thought for this solar cycle are looking pretty good. So hopefully that will continue. I was also involved, and I'm sure Martin, you're going to mention this, with I joined into the the digital talk group at the weekend when we had the activity day, and that was a lot of fun. I wasn't on all day like you, Martin, but I joined a couple of times, and certainly towards the end, it sounded pretty busy. And I'm sure you're going to go on to that one, Martin, there, so I won't steal your thunder on that too much. But apart from that, not a huge amount, really, not compared to some of the guys talking earlier.
You've been busy, certainly. Well, I'm ashamed to say that I've done very, very little because there's a lot going on in my world at the moment with things I have to get done this year. So I haven't done as much radio as I'd like. However, I did do the activity day last Saturday on the 4th of March, and we run from 7 UTC to 1900 UTC, and not hundreds of people joined, but those that joined really enjoyed themselves, and there was some interesting chats and one thing and another. But I have to tip my hat to Phil, VK6 ADF. Now, bearing in mind, it was 7 in the morning for me till 7 in the evening. For Phil in Western Australia, it's 3 in the afternoon till 3 in the morning. I got to tell you, Phil was there, not all day, but he wasn't there. He was there or thereabouts most of the day, and certainly around for the last couple of, or after midnight for him, right through till 3 in the morning. And if anybody was listening, I knew I was wrecked by about coming to the end. And the last quarter of an hour, I know I was wrecked, and I'm sure Phil was wrecked. And I'm not sure either of us were making much sense, but we were talking to everybody who came up, and we were having, it was great fun. So I thoroughly enjoyed it. And yeah, we'll do it again another time. The interesting one is that's a day when Mrs. B makes me the cup of tea, because although I could wander about, because you can do it on a handy talkie, but I tend to do it on a proper rig, on a mobile rig in the shack. One other thing I did do, and Martin will be impressed with this, I had a 4-meter contact, 70 megs. Now, nothing special in that.
4 meters?
Yeah,
Wow.
well, no, nothing special with 4 meters, because I often do it. But there I was on Sunday morning, and I had the 4 meter on, and the waterfall display was on the 7300, and I spotted one down at 70.260, and I've since found out what that frequency is predominantly used for, although there was a contact going on. So I thought, it can't be FM, because FM's above 70.3. So let's go down to 70.26, and we'll go up a sideband, because that's the thing. And I tuned the station in, and I could hear him really well. He was a bit muffled, and I turned him in to get the sideband all lined up nicely. Went for a gap, and I called him. And the gentleman came back to me and said, the station just calling us an upper sideband. We're actually using AM. And I thought, I've never had a contact on AM. So on a Sunday morning, had a contact on AM, and turns out in the UK, 70.260 is the AM calling frequency. Nobody else was on it apart from 3 of us. We weren't told to move, but it used to be the AM calling frequency. And one of the guys had a 1970s PMR rig that had been converted, a Pi Westminster that had been converted to amateur use, and it was crystal channeled. So, bit of fun, and I enjoyed it by having my first AM contact. So this year I've had my first AM contact and my first 23 SEMS contact. So, doing a few things, I suppose.
Martin, we could have had an AM contact on 4 as well. There is a I think it's on Echo Link, but you can actually get to 70.26 in London on AM via Echo Link, I think.
All right.
But yeah, it's there's actually a net I think goes on 70.26. So have a tune down there. I always forget to go down there. But if you want to have another AM content, let's do that.
Yeah, we can do that. Well, I need to get into the shack and do some bits. This week, of course, which is something that I'll mention at the end in 73s, but this week, of course, some of us, Chris and Edmund and I and Mrs. B, will be at Hamzilla with Colin. So,
Colin and Mrs. B keeping us all in check.
Well, trying to anyway. But yeah, so
She's the boss.
Hey?
She's the boss. Yes.
She's the boss, yeah, definitely. She tells everybody that as well. So, on the Sunday this podcast goes out, if you are near Ashford in Kent, just off Junction 20, just off the M20, Junction 10, I believe it is, for Ashford, why not pop along? It should be a good rally. I think it's open pretty much all day, and they also got lectures. And if you haven't had enough of me on this podcast, I'm doing one of the lectures in the lecture stream for them. So there you go. So that's what I've been up to. Not a lot, but a bit of fun nevertheless. So all that's left for me to do now is thank you all for turning up tonight. Wish you 73s and move on to the rest of the podcast. So I'd like to thank Mr. Chris Howard.
Thank you very much, Martin. Thanks, guys. It's been another fun episode. Thank you.
Yeah, and I forgot you called Simon, didn't I?
M0 TCH, Martin. How many times you said it in your lab? Come on.
Yeah. I'm having a moment. Listen,
You're still tired from the weekend, aren't you, doing that activity day? You really are.
Yeah, I tell you, there's two things wrong with me. I've got an ism, like everybody else. I've got an ism. Mine's called old ageism.
I'll second that.
Yeah, and I'm also OCD. Old, cranky, and dangerous.
I'm OCD, but it's more like CDO, isn't it, with the letters in the right order, as they should be.
All right. All right. I'd also like to thank Mr. Martin Rothwell at M0SGL.
It's been fun.
Yeah. I'd like to thank Mr. Frank Howell, K4FMH.
Thank you, Martin. And keeping up with the theme, I'd like to say 73, but get off my lawn.
Yeah. I'll get off your lawn, Frank. I'll do the
Oh, no, just turn the sprinklers on. It will soon move.
Yeah. And,
I've done that. I've actually done that, by the way.
You're getting 300 wet, though.
Yeah. Okay. I'd also like to thank Mr. Leslie Butterfield, G0CIB. Thanks for joining, Leslie.
What can I say, Martin? It's been a blast. And my call sign Golf Zero Cash in Bank.
Cash in Bank. Yeah, there you go. That's not a bad one. So, yeah. And Mr. Bill Barnes, as I say, that was on a hard stop. He's had to leave us, but Mr. Bill Barnes, WC3B, was also with us. So all I'm going to do now is say 73, guys, and we'll catch you all soon. 73.
Cheerio.
Keep your amateur ham radio podcast advert free by donating less than a length of coax. Visit www.icqpodcast.com/donate now. For all the news, links and information, visit www.icqpodcast.com.
And now we have a look at the news in brief with me, Colin M6BRY. News here from Australia, but at the same time probably very relevant to elders around the world, that a scam artist has struck again in Australia. He has claimed he's selling an ICOM 7300 from a deceased estate, and basically he lists online and uses various fraudster tricks to convince, as say, his catch that he's legitimate, that he is who he says he is, etc. And I say he's extremely confident in arranging to have the money transferred to him, and then obviously is never seen again. So basically it's a buyer beware opportunity, not only for Australia but obviously for anybody in general, as I say, when using the internet to go for all your normal checks and etc. about being safe. But they were saying some of the tricks here include copy and paste photographs of the image they supplied into Google search engine, because one of the things he's doing is just lifting pictures from the internet, etc., of silent keys that have been maybe dead for a couple of years but claiming they're himself, etc. And as I say, just trying to generally scam people along the way. So a buyer beware notice, not only obviously for Australia, but more importantly, I suppose, for everybody, as say in the amateur radio world, just to be considerate when buying stuff online. Now, IO117 is continuing to prove lots of fun for amateur radio satellite operators, as people are working away on that satellite. Now, last month, Dave Fisher, Kilo Golf Zero Delta, worked Lucky Bianchi, Victor's Uniform 2 Lima Bravo Whiskey, on a distance of 12,939 kilometers. As I say, that was thought to be a record until Hector Martinez, Whiskey 5 Charlie Bravo Foxtrot, worked a station operated by Oleg Vacocini, I think it's pronounced, A65 Bravo Romeo, only a couple of weeks earlier, and that was hitting just under 13,000 kilometers at 12,996 kilometers. So some amazing distances being achieved as they're operating through that satellite IO117. But as I say, the current record stands at 12,996 kilometres. So congratulations for all involved and all the amateurs, as I say, making those fantastic contacts. And certainly, if it's something that'd be of interest to yourself, it's a great opportunity to check that out for now. If you want to know what the current distance records are, AMSAT have a interesting website. We'll put the link on our website, icqpodcast.com, for you to check out what those distance records are. But as I say, that would give you a flavour of, what you could potentially achieve in that base there. Right, now we're going to head over to our features episode, which is recruiting into the ham radio hobby. As always, hope you enjoy.
And now what you've all been waiting for, this episode's feature from the ICQ podcast. Hi guys, for this episode's feature, I thought I'd give you a bit of a background of why I got asked to do recruiting into our hobby, finding people for our hobby. Now, this came out of a meeting we did with another club, and we were sitting down, our club and their club, and discussing all sorts of bits and pieces along the lines of how you find new members. And one of the guys said, Martin, I'm surprised you haven't done this for the podcast. You should do this, blah, blah, blah. I went, okay, I'll look into it. Well, I have looked into it, and it turned out we released this subject on the 14th of March 2010, 14 years ago. So, effectively, I've heard that feature, and I don't believe I can do much better with that particular feature. I've tidied it up a bit, but apart from that, the feature is the same as it was in 2014. All I'm going to do now, before you all turn off, is add some extra bits to it. So, in fairness, there are other things I've thought about over the years and may improve it, but the initial talk I did, I think, still stands and is still very valid. And quite honestly, I forgot about it. For those of you who remember it and got better memories than me, well, it's just going to be a revision for you. For those of you who haven't heard it because it was 14 years ago, it's going to be new to you. But I hope you enjoy anyway. Now, as I say, we came out of a meeting and they said, well, the club secretary said, from the other club said, well, why haven't you done this? And I went, okay, well, let's look at it. Now, he also suggested that we should be relying on the National Society to find members for clubs. Now, this isn't going to happen in a million years. This is not what a National Society does. A National Society groups clubs together and supports the club. It doesn't find the club's members. This is not what the National Society is there for. However, I remember talking to Michael Sampson, G0POT, back a good few years ago, and we run a session for him because he was travelling around the country and doing some work with the RSGB on growing clubs. And he did a presentation to us in a workshop, and I remember booking the hall for him to do it in South London, and a large number of clubs in the area were invited to do that. So we have worked on it. Michael was working on the Inspire project for the RSGB. Unfortunately, if you go to their website, I believe all the links no longer work, but it's worth potentially having trying to find this out and finding out a bit more about him. Now, things extra that I think we kind of need to do in the hobby is be welcoming to people. You know, if somebody turns up, welcome them. Now, not everybody can do this, and this is one of the things Michael was talking about when you do events or people turn up. Some people are very, very good technically, but are quite shy and won't talk to new people. Now, I know this because I know quite a few people, including my second son, that won't talk to you till he's met you about a half a dozen times at least. So, you know, not everybody can walk up, shake somebody's hand and say, hey, how you doing? What's your interest? Blah, blah, blah. I know I can. What you have to do is use people in your club that can do that. I think we're not very visible, which is another problem. You know, if we're out and about or we're doing things, you know, we need to be made visible. You know, have a banner, a board which says what you're doing. Welcome people over to talk to them if need be. Be engaging. You know, if somebody walks by and says, what you doing? You know, engage them in a chat and explain to them what you're doing. But don't just have a pre-prepared speech. You have to watch their body language to make sure that they aren't losing the will to live for what you're telling them. You know, gauge your pitch to people based on what knowledge they want. It's not wrong to check and say, well, do you have a knowledge of electronics or radio? You know, ask that first. And then you can pitch to the level that you think you ought to be pitching to. Let's say engagement's important. Socialising. Now, I think that one of the things that I think clubs in the UK and probably other parts of the world don't do as well as the clubs on Cyprus is they socialise on Cyprus. Now, I know it's a nice warm country, but they go out for a lunch fairly regularly. They have get-togethers and they invite the partners. I'm not going to say wives because there are lady amateurs on Cyprus and some of the husbands aren't amateurs, but they do have social events where they invite the partners along. This could be a barbecue or a pub lunch or whatever, or the monthly lunch. So that could be another way of involving people. Now, the other thing I'm thinking that we're missing out on is, you know, parents don't like to let their children go off to see all sorts of strange people. Well, so maybe we are strange. But we're missing tapping into our own families in some ways, because if we got, like me, I'm a granddad, if we promote the hobby to our children or our grandchildren and they come along, that might just generate some interest and let them have a bit of fun and you get some time. Now, once again, socialising. You know, invite them along to a social event, your grandchildren or your children to a social event, or the wife, you know, or partner, I should say, not necessarily the wife. But I think we've got to socialise and get people more in. One of the things that I know our club secretary, Chris, works very hard on is getting people onto the lecture circuit where, you know, he's booking lectures in advance. Now, every club, no matter who they are probably struggling to get people to come and do talks for them. I know we did a talk, Chris and I, some years ago for Sutton Mariners, the people with the yachts, and they thoroughly enjoyed what we told them. So, maybe we need to get ourselves onto the lecture circuit for some of the other clubs, for their club secretaries. And we can come and give you an introduction to amateur radio or ham radio, but not push them so they've got to do it, but make it interesting so that when they do come along and do it, everybody understands and has fun. So kind of that's where I am at the moment. I know I've pushed quite a few things. I told you we run a feature back in March 2010, on the 14th of March 2010 actually. I still stand by it. I've just edited it a little bit, and I'm going to tack it to the end of this feature. So I hope, it's given you some things to think about. But please don't switch off, because I doubt if I would have remembered everything that was in the 2010 feature. And if you do remember me doing it, I'm sure it would be a good memory jogger to help you get more members into your club. Anyway, I'm now back to 2010 for you to listen to the original feature. Hi guys and girls. What I thought I'd like to talk about this time was growing your radio club. I'll be honest with you, a number of clubs in the UK, and I have no reason to believe it wouldn't be the same all around the world, are starting to contract. Well, let's be honest, most of our membership are well above 50. I mean, I'm above 50 myself. And unless we get new people into the hobby, things are going to become very, very difficult for us as time moves on. So, kind of what I was saying is, how do we grow our clubs? How do we make things more better for us? How do we get people into our hobby? I mean, because I don't want to be in 20 years' time talking to myself and have nobody on the air. So, I kind of feel a number of things make for a club to grow. Now, I did this because some of the members of the club said, it's all about the training, and lots of people believe it's all about, if the club does training, they'll grow. Now, for my own club, I don't believe that to be the case. Yes, training is quite an important part of the club, and it has produced new members, but I think across the board there are lots of things that make a club successful, make it grow where others contract. I think the first thing is to be friendly. To be friendly to new members when they turn up to your club meetings. Introduce yourself to them. Chat to them. Don't rough them up to join the minute they walk through the door, but invite them to be involved. Invite them to your meetings and get people to come along and see what a friendly bunch you are. Introduce them to people. Find out what they're interested in, and then introduce them to a person in your club that's interested in that particular part of amateur radio. So it's kind of these sort of things that very, very difficult. I've been to other clubs where you turn up on the door, and I'm a fairly outgoing person, but you turn up and because they don't know you, nobody talks to you. And what a waste, especially if I'd been new to the hobby and didn't know anything about it, and I turned up and that was my first club. Would I be in the hobby today? Probably not. Anyway, moving on. Training. Yes, training I think is important to a club. And yeah, we do get new members out of the training courses we run. Let's be brutally honest about it, but it's not the only reason we do it. We do it because we enjoy doing it. And once again, it has to come back to the enjoyment. And you being passionate about what you do. You can't just say, we do training, what the hell sort of thing. But training will generate you membership, but it's a hard way of producing membership. You have to put a fair amount of effort into it to get it, but it's worth doing. Supporting newly licensed amateurs. This is one of my pet subjects. It's kind of difficult for people who've been in the hobby, say 20, 30, 40 years. You've been through umpteen good sunspot cycles. You've had the radio. You've done all the bits and pieces. And the first time you were at the States or Australia, you were probably jumping for joy and all excited. And I find too often that what happens is that people get into a situation where a newbie works, say, the States, and they go and tell people at the club, and they come out, got the T-shirt, wrote the thesis, seen the video, and they're not very excited about it. And I think that we should be very excited for the person doing it themselves. And I try and show interest, because I am generally interested in the hobby. But I think that just because, somebody's done something I've done many times, just because it's the first time they've done it, they will be very excited. And, I remember my times when I did it the first time. I was excited. So, I think we need to show some, show some excitement, and some enthusiasm, and listen to what other people say. Another thing is, I think we need to publicise what your members are doing. In a club, you will have, often clubs will have a core interest where lots of people in the club are interested in, say, amateur TV or VHF or Morse or whatever it is. But other members of the club may be interested in contesting, Virtual Britain, building, and all sorts of bits and pieces. And I think it's interesting that you need to understand and publicise what your people do, so that when you get new members turn up and they say, well, I'm kind of interested in this more stuff, or you can tell them what it's all about. Or if I'm interested in QRP, get them to talk to a QRP operator. That's the thing where if you put them with somebody who's passionate about what they're doing, they will grow from that information. Contests. Well, it's not my bag. Let's be brutally honest, but a lot of people get great enjoyment out of contests. It's a great way for proving that your kit works. I don't find it very exciting, but I'll often go into a contest and work a few stations just to prove that the antennas are working properly and the rig's working properly and all those sort of things. And for those who enjoy contests, get the new people involved. What's the point of sitting in a room operating on your own when you can have somebody else come around and help you? Even if they're logging, they can log for you. And then when you get a bit hoarse, you swap over and let them operate for you, and you log for them. And as a contest station, you'll both win out, because the new person will find out all about contesting, and you'll have somebody there helping you. Another thing I think is good you need to do from a club point of view is have good meeting content. So most clubs tend to have a meeting where they have a lecture. Now, on the lecture nights, I think you need to have good content. It doesn't always have to be amateur radio, but it has to be of a technical nature. My own particular club tends to have 12 meetings a year, which are official meetings, and we have 12 unofficial meetings, which are the natter nights. We have 12 natter nights and 12 club nights. Now, on the main club nights, 10 of those will be lectures. One will be the AGM, and one will be the junk sale, which normally happens just before Christmas. And we tend to get between 8 and 10 very good radio-related lectures. Now, occasionally, we'll have a lecture on something that's not radio-related, but it will be of a technical nature. And I think that's the important thing. And it's interesting. Us amateurs are always interested in that sort of thing anyway. So I think good meeting content is what gets your members to come to your meetings. Now, the other thing I think is also something we need to talk about is mix of old and new technologies. Now, I think the thing is that I keep hearing, not necessarily at my club, but I'm talking to amateurs, this D-Star or this Echolink or this IRP, it isn't real radio. It's not this, it's not that. Well, I kind of remember a gentleman who's unfortunately a silent key now, and he told me in the 60s how he was deemed as the bad boy of the area, because he was operating SSB and everybody else was on AM. Haven't times changed? Let's embrace the new technologies. I think sometimes people are frightened of the new technologies because they don't understand them. Kind of get involved in the new technologies, enjoy. And, if somebody who's up on the new technologies talks to one of the more senior members of the club, you don't have to rub his nose in it. You tell him, because I'm sure that the more senior member of the club can tell you something about some of the older technologies that you have holes in your memory or gaps in your memory. So, there's a lot of instances where, new and old technologies can be shared by people just sitting around a table and talking and helping each other. Okay. Another thing I think is an important thing to do is promoting our hobby. Now, when I say promoting our hobby, how often do we get the chance to talk to the general public? Now, I like to operate I like to operate in a park in the summer when the weather permitting. I like to sit outdoors. I enjoy the general public walking by and asking me what I'm doing. But I rather them do that than to phone the police and say there's a terrorist operating in the park, as they've done before, but we get over that. But I really want them to come and find out what we're talking about, and I spend time talking to the general public. Sometimes I'll lose half an hour's operating while I explain to somebody who, if they're interested enough, about what our hobby's all about and why, and they go away interested. Now, maybe they won't get into amateur radio, but we've had this guy, they will remember this guy who was passionate about his hobby, polite to them, explained to them, treated them with respect, and they will go away thinking of our hobby in a good light. If you shout at them or say, you're off with them, you standoffish, that comes across into a hobby. The same as the CB operator. If the CB operator comes up to you, you don't have to abuse him. You don't have to abuse him or her and say, oh, you're better than them, because you aren't. You're just different. And don't miss the opportunity of saying to the CB operator, I'm sorry, this is amateur radio, however, we do have a band very close to your CB at 10 metres, and yours is 11, and talk to them about the benefits of amateur radio. Talk to them about the new licensing, how that it's 3-tier now, and they don't have to do more to get a licence, and if they would get an amateur licence, it gives them far more privileges and far more power legally than they've got on CB. And get them involved. They are usually interested in radio and just need somebody to, mentor them and help them along the way. Other things we tend to do as a club is have play days. Play days, once again, days when you go out and you allow people to do things. And the very early days of the play days we used to do is we'd get together as a group and we'd say to people, what do you want to do? And a lot of the foundation licensees who say, I want to run a bit more power, I want to do this, I want to try this particular mode of operation. And us full licensees would go out and we'd put out, maybe out in the field somewhere, we'd put up an antenna and we'd operate, let them operate under supervision with higher power and all the bits and pieces and allow them to experience the hobby and other parts of the hobby that they probably couldn't do based on the equipment they have or their license conditions. And equally, sometimes it was, I want to try this mode of operation, or I want to try that mode of operation, or I'd like to know more about this, or whatever. So, play days are very good for having a go at something different, something you don't normally do. Another thing I think that makes clubs positive is club projects. If you can get a little project on the go, start building something. Antennas, aerials. Antennas are obviously a classic one. Kit ATUs, little transceivers, that sort of thing. It does give you a little bit more interest. It gives you interest to talk to your fellow colleagues about. And, there's always people there can help you getting things on the air. If you don't have all the test equipment because you're a member of a club, somebody will help you. So that's another useful one. But kind of what I'm coming down to is I think we have to enjoy the hobby and what we're doing. So if you enjoy what you're doing and you enjoy sharing and helping and working with others, I think that's the thing, that's the pure key to our hobby. Thoroughly enjoyment, doing what you're doing. Elmering others, well, the Americans call it elmering or mentoring. Working with other people, you don't always have to be the elmer. Somebody, you'll elmer a number of people and they will elmer, some of them will elmer you back on other subjects. So you don't have to be the fountain of all knowledge in all areas. Just be the fountain of knowledge in the areas you're good at, and let other people elmer you in the areas that you want advice on. So that's kind of thing. And I think the other thing is important. Another thing is kind of important is don't be afraid to work with other clubs and to achieve your goals. We often work with other clubs in the area on events. And we'll quite clearly be asked to help them, and we'll ask them to help us. But we work as individuals. Now, it doesn't matter that we're 2 different clubs or 3 different clubs operating doing this event. It's there because A, we enjoy radio, B, we're promoting our hobby to the public, and that's the important thing. We're not worried. I think if you're not happy with yourself and your club, you're worried that your members are going to get stolen away from you. If you're doing a good job and you work with another club and they're doing a good job, then your members won't move. And if they do join 2 clubs, they will stay with you anyway. A number of our members belong to more than one club, and there's no reason why they shouldn't. They're into the hobby, not a club only. But clubs working together is certainly one way forward to develop the hobby. The last thing I kind of want to say about helping you develop your club is listen to your members. Listen to your members. What do they want? What do they want to do? It's no good setting a plan of contesting in every contest if you've got a group of members that are not interested in competitions, or doing HF if they're all interested in VHF and you're trying to flog HF. You are flogging a dead horse there. You've got to effectively listen to your members and set your meetings and what the club is doing based on what your members want. So kind of I whittled on for a while about how to grow your club, and these are my personal feelings on this and why a club is successful. It's why I belong to the club I belong to, because we practice most of these, if not all of them, and we are a friendly bunch and we work together. And I think this is the reason why the club I'm a member of is growing, where others in the area are contracting. And okay, am I worried to tell everybody our secret? No, because I want the hobby to grow. I don't want to be in a hobby where in 20 years' time, when there's only half a dozen people in the UK I can talk to. So I hope this has been helpful. It's probably a lot of information I've thrown at you, but it's kind of all sensible. There's no rocket science in this. I think this is the way forward for the club. And to say this is what we do, I hope it works for you.
Whether it's across the pond or over the channel, the ICQ podcast is international.
Herzlich willkommen in Deutschland. 73 de España.
By amateurs, for amateurs.
Well, everybody, I really hope you enjoyed our features episode, Recruiting into Our Amateur Radio Hobby. And as always, I'm sure that even if you're an active recruiter, Elmer, someone who, does their bit for promoting the hobby, there's always something there for everybody to think about and maybe expand on and, to help grow the numbers. If you've got any ideas or suggestions while following a feature, you know the way you can get in contact with us. Usual way, go to icqpodcast.com and click on the Contact Us link, send us your thoughts, and we'd be happy to hear about them. Now, talking about thoughts, we've got some feedback this episode regarding a couple of topics. So first off, from Michael McEnish, I think it's pronounced, Kilo India 7, Mike Tango India, and he asks about Echolink as a digital mode. And I think this is in relation to the digital group. So I'll hand this one over to you, Dad, as this is your baby, your project, and you can let us know about Echolink and the digital talk group.
Yeah, Colin, no problems at all. Michael, I agree with you that Echolink is a digital mode when it makes it onto the internet, and it is a voice over IP product. But it's not one of the main ones that I was wanting to do. And by adding Echolink to our system wouldn't have worked particularly well. We actually managed to control how our system works and the quality. So I did think about Echolink, and there are a couple of other audio options, but predominantly if the audio comes in from a device, from an analog device, then we probably won't run with it, because it's about digital encoding that we're actually talking about. Probably haven't explained that particularly well, Michael. Drop me another email if you want me to go and I'll with a contact, and I'll call you back on Skype or whatever. But no, Echolink won't be added to our digital talk group, Colin.
There you go. Now from the States to Cyprus, where Nestor gets in contact with us, 5B4 Alpha Hotel Zulu, and he says he listened to the feature about carrier grade natting. You could try any desk for remote desktop control your PC. There's a free version for personal use. Also, you get your hands on a Fritz router. You might be able to overcome the carrier grade natting to connect your internal network. Fritz offers a VPN service if you register for free on their system. You have to install the Fritz router between the ISP router and your internal network. This will cause you an additional NAT stage, but with proper setup, you should be able to get over that without too much hassle. Basically, Fritz offers their own custom and free DNS service. For Windows 10 or 11, this is a specific application that you need to use to get the Fritz VPN to work. If you decide to go in this way, let me know and I'll find the application for you. Bless you, Nestor. We appreciate that. As he said, and Android VPN access works directly. Connecting via the VITS VPN, he has access to his whole internal network as well as the local connected via the LAN. Not sure if there's any other routers that are offering a similar service to the Fritz. I don't have access to carrier grade networks, so you can't confirm the above works, but you get your hands on it and give it a go. So some good technical advice there. I suppose in essence this Fritz router would act similar to a sort of a firewall type of link in between the ISP's modem and say your internal switch to give that work from there. But we appreciate Nestor, of course, for giving you some ideas there, Dad.
Yeah, I thank Nestor for the ideas. Nestor, I will investigate your ideas, and also I had some information from Ed Durant. I copied Ed Durant on a couple of things, and he's just sorting out his network provider. IP6 might be the router's way to go. Nestor, thanks for your update. When things quieten down in my life, and that's probably a bit of a joke, I'll spend a lot more time investigating this, but certainly some good food for thought, and hopefully some good information for others who may go down that route. But carrier grade natting was something I didn't know about, and lots of people I spoke to didn't know about. So the fact I've had some feedback means that it will be useful to a number of other amateurs as well. So Nestor, I thank you very, very much. I'm not sure if I've actually met you, Nestor, and I apologize if I have and have forgotten, but Cyprus, a lovely country and a great group of guys out there. So thanks very much for your feedback, mate.
Yeah, now, as always, if you want to get in touch with the show, best way of doing that is go to icqpodcast.com and click on the Contact Us link and send us your thoughts, and we'd greatly appreciate hearing from you. Now, people we also really appreciate is our donors this episode. So along with our monthly subscription donors, Winston Lawrence, KD2 Whiskey Lima Lima, is our inaugural member of the ICQ 400 Club. Thank you, Winston, for setting up your subscription donation. And Dave LeBlanc, Kilo Foxtrot 7, Juliet Alpha Foxtrot, also, as I donated this episode, and we really do appreciate, guys, in you showing the value for the show, your support, keeping us advert free, and as I say, letting us continue to provide you this wonderful show now for nearly 15 years, and of course, nearly 400 episodes, so we really do appreciate that. You can show the value you receive from our show by doing something very, very simple. You go to icqpodcast.com/donate and select one of our many options to join in, and say your treasure and your value that you show us, as I help us to continue to do the work we do, advert free, and as I continue producing your show for you every fortnight. So we really do appreciate that. We'd also like to thank Chris, Mike 0 Tango Charlie Hotel, Martin, Mike 0 Sierra Golf Lima, Frank Kilo 4 Foxtrot Mike Hotel, Bill Whiskey Charlie 3 Bravo, and Leslie Golf 0 Charlie India Bravo for taking part here in the News Roundtable Day. Many thanks, guys, for taking part. We're actually recording this slightly earlier than we normally would in our record schedule, for the very simple reason I'm off to the airport now to jump on a plane to head to London, as it's Hamzilla weekend, and I'll be heading to the southeast coast of England for Hamzilla, along with Dad, and Mrs. B Mum is coming with us as well, I believe, and I believe also Ed Spicer might be with us as well. So just to let you know of the members that will be down the area. I'm not sure if anyone else is going yet, but we might get others join in very, very late along the lines there. We'll be there as this show releases on Sunday morning. So, say if you're in the southeast of England or can get down to that part of the world and wish to come along and say hello, you're more than welcome. We look forward to seeing you at Hamzilla. As I say, and we'll be playing with some new recording gear, hopefully, if it works well in testing on Saturday, to see how that goes for us at the show. So again, we'll be looking for the stories and the news from the Hamzilla show to share with you in the future upcoming episodes. Well, I need you to make sure you look after Mum now and make Mrs. B a lovely cup of tea, and maybe too early for a chocolate biscuit, so we are recording this a little bit early, but as I say, if there are any left, I might even make us a cup of tea myself over the weekend, and maybe say pinch that treat you should have given her and claim it for myself, Dad, as I say. So I'll leave you to make that for Mum.
Yeah, no problems at all, Colin. I'll go make your mum a drink in a minute. However, one quick thing, and this is going to prove, and this is a quick one, Colin, this will prove whether people actually listen all the way through. I screwed up a little bit in the feature by saying it was 14 years ago. For some reason, I thought it was 2004, 24. So it was actually 13 years. So I'm apologising now for getting that wrong. If any of you haven't listened this far through the podcast and you send me an email, I now know you don't listen to the last bit. Hi. Okay, Colin, let me go make your mum a drink, and we'll catch up, pick you up from the airport later. 73, mate.
73, so have a great fortnight.